to Visa Game Plan. Let us be your migration coach. Hi Keith, how are you today?
I'm very well, Amasha. Very excited to discuss trade occupations and how to get employer sponsorships as a tradesperson. I wanted to know if you could list a couple of successful cases we've done at our firm. What were some of the occupations that we've assisted in the last year?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. So actually we've helped a couple of carpenters, diesel technicians, motor mechanics, and gardeners.
Yes, that gardening case was quite interesting, particularly for me as well. It was the first case where where the applicant actually didn't have any formal education in the field, right? He had not studied at all.
How did we actually go about it?
Yeah, so the way we went about it is, so we first went to ANSCO and looked at the education requirement. So in ANSCO, the education requirement for a gardener was a certificate 3 or 3 years of formal experience. So this particular applicant had worked in the UK as well before he came to Australia. So in the UK, he had about 5 years of experience. In Australia, he had come on a working holiday visa and he had about 2 years of experience before we sponsored him, right? So we used both the offshore and the onshore experience to demonstrate that at least 3 years of work experience substitutes for the formal education.
Oh, that's very interesting actually. So which means we can use both the work experiences where they've gathered offshore as well in that sense.
Correct.
In Australia.
Correct. So we just use the 3 years of work experience to substitute for the certificate 3 requirement, and then the 482 visa at the time when we did his application last year, you needed to have 2 years of experience. So because he had 7 years of experience combined, we were able to use that.
Is there like a formal certification we need to have when you substitute the work experience and the formal qualification?
No, so the whole reason, the reason why you use work experience instead of a formal qualification is because you have not studied in that particular occupation. However, there is something important to remember. In a lot of the trade occupations, for particularly the 482 visa, there is a mandatory skill assessment component, right? So if you actually are in one of those occupations, like let's say a fitter or a cabinet maker, for example, cabinet maker is not there, but fitter, for example, then you need to do the recognition of prior learning process. It's called the RPL, where you take a couple of years of formal experience, go to a registered training organization in Australia, like a college, and get them to assess your work experience as equivalent to a certificate 3 or 4.
So that's exactly what we did with the gardener.
No, with the gardener we didn't do that actually, because the gardening occupation was not on the mandatory skill occupation. So we didn't even need to go and get a recognition of prior learning certificate. We could have just lodged the visa. But if you are actually having an occupation that requires a mandatory skill assessment, I would say go and you have not studied in that occupation, I would say go and do an RPL process and get the certification before you then go and make the application, because there's an exemption to mandatory skill assessments, and one of that exemption is if you have actually formally studied in Australia or you have an Australian qualification.
Also, like lately, there's been a very huge and like vast shortage when it comes to all these trades occupations.
Particularly the construction trades, no?
Construction trade, definitely. Have you come across clients like that, who are looking into get sponsored under the construction field?
And also move into the construction. Yeah, actually, that's something I've been now advising recently. So what I always tell my clients is the reason that we get visa from the Australian government is because there is a skills shortage in the economy and we have the skills to contribute to that shortage, right? So it's always important to understand what skills are in shortage and try to acquire those skills. So right now, Australia is having a huge housing shortage. I think the whole Western world is, but Australia is particularly having an acute shortage. And the government is also looking to build more houses.
Right.
So you need construction tradespeople, you need carpenters, you need bricklayers, you need even cabinet makers to do the furniture in the houses, so on and so forth, right? So we are seeing a lot of clients who maybe originally came to Australia to do white collar professional studies, accountants, marketeers, MBAs, whatever. Those individuals are also now going into the construction trades field because you can achieve a certificate 3 in 1 year.
Yeah, that's
or you can use 2 years of work experience to actually get a recognition of prior learning and therefore get the relevant certification required, right?
Yeah, and remember that accountant we had who had a master's in accounting, but then again he was telling us when he applied to cabinet makers or carpenters, he was getting called in for jobs than the accountant because he couldn't go as an accountant because
you're right. In his situation, he had done an MPA, then he had gone on to his 485. But during his studies, he had started working as a cabinet maker part-time. And once he graduated also, he continued to work full-time as a cabinet maker. And he was saying he tried to look for jobs in the accounting field, but it was too competitive competitive and it was virtually impossible to get an interview. But as a cabinet maker, so many job opportunities and so many of the companies are even willing to sponsor these people because of the critical shortage of that skill.
So when talking about the sponsoring aspect of it, are there any eligibility requirements that sponsors will have to also meet?
Well, most of the trade occupations don't have any caveats. The only real issue that I check as a lawyer usually is whether that particular trade occupation has a mandatory skill assessment requirement. If it has a skill assessment requirement, I see if there is a exemption to the skill assessment, such as the usual exemption is that you hold an Australian qualification. So if the client has not studied a certificate 3 or 4 in that trades field, we look to see whether we can do a RPL for them. Yeah. And then we use that exemption without a skill assessment, we proceed. In terms of employer requirements, it's usually the standard requirements. It should be a validly established employer. It should be trading in Australia and profitable, or at least has a positive cash flow position. And they need to have an organizational chart that depicts who are the other employees in the company. But when it comes to trade occupations, I'm a little more relaxed than other white collar occupations. So usually if the client comes to us with an employer who's got less than $1 million turnover and they want to be sponsored, I tell them that there's a huge risk. But with trade occupations, I'm a little bit more relaxed because of that critical shortage. The government also knows that these companies will grow, and if they have the correct employees, particularly the trade employees, they can service the shortage and the company can grow as well.
Does that necessarily mean that when the department actually analyzes the submissions that we've made, they would be more relaxed in their discretion?
Well, that has been my experience so far. Usually with things like construction trade occupations, particularly carpenters and stuff, it's quite easy to get a 482 these days as long as the company meets the minimum requirements. The one thing I should say is, with trade occupations, you should always try to work for a company that is actually providing that trade as a service. So you want to work for a carpenter, you want to work for a furniture manufacturer if you're a cabinet maker, or a caravan company if you're a cabinet maker. If you are, part of a large organization that is doing other things but needs like an in-house tradesperson, I might be a little bit more careful with that application. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I might be a little bit more careful.
I have a question for you. So this is one of the questions our clients raise. So basically, there are people who've come into Australia to do white collar jobs, like white collar qualifications, and now they feel like they really can't strategize their PR pathway through that. And now they see the trades occupation, there's like a very big shortage in the market. How do we kind of help or guide our clients in that pathway if they want to shift?
Yeah, that's a very good question actually. Particularly now we are seeing a lot of clients because they know by the time they graduate they'll be over 35. They're not eligible for the 485 as well. So usually what I say is, if you're in that boat, I would say parallel to studying your master's or your bachelor's, you can parallelly also study a certificate 3.
That's interesting.
Right? So it's called a parallel enrollment and it's completely legal as long as you're doing one qualification at a bachelor's level and above and the other qualification at a certificate level. So usually if you know you're going to graduate and be over 35 by the time you graduate, making you ineligible for the 485, I would say start studying a parallel course in a trades, try to find an employer that you can work for, and as you are finishing your certificate qualification in the trades, apply for a 407 training visa, because 1 year of work experience or study experience is sufficient to meet the 407. The other way I would do it is, if you're already on a 485, as long as you have at least 12 months left on your 485, I would recommend start a trade course, a certificate 3 or a 4 relevant to your qualification, and then look for employment in that field, because as long as you have 1 year of work experience and study experience, you qualify for the 482. The important part, Amasha, is that 482 does not require your work experience to be post-qualification.
It does.
Correct, right? So while you're doing your certificate 3, if you're working full-time as a carpenter or a bricklayer, then you can use that to go for a 482.
You can even prorate it, right? The work experience?
Correct. Even if you work part-time, if you do, say you do 2 years of 20 hours a week, that equals to 1 year full-time.
Definitely.
Right?
That's a good part.
So that's a good way to strategize it, particularly if you know, like say you've done IT. IT is a thing that a lot of people study in Australia. But the skill assessment requirement is that you need to have 1 year of post-qualification work experience, which is very hard to get if you don't have an IT job as you graduate. So what I tell those clients is, if you feel like you can't find an IT job and you feel like you don't want to do the professional year qualification as well, then the best thing to do is do a trade course and start working parallelly, because that will really help you open up the pathway to PR through the employer sponsorship.
It would really help them strategize the pathway in that sense.
Correct, correct. And the other thing that you should also understand is the employer you work for does not need to be a company alone, because a lot of these tradey companies are usually run as a sole proprietorship, just under the ABN of the employer. So in this gardener's situation, for example, the employer was a sole trader. He was not even a company.
Yeah.
But we can still go about it. You just need a proper valid employment contract. You need to do your labor market test. You need to prove that you're paying the Australian market salary rate, and then no problems, you can proceed. So I think construction tradies particularly have a very bright future in Australia.
That was very useful, Keith. It was very comprehensive. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
That's all for today at Visa Game Plan. See you next time.